This is CTMU Philosophers, and in this video we'll be discussing the work of Immanuel Kant. And in the near future we'll do a video or maybe a series on Kantian philosophy, and in particular Kantian metaphysics, and read through his Critique of Pure Reason, Critique of Practical Reason, groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. But for the time being, however, I just want to provide a cursory overview of his moral philosophy, which is really rich and profound. And so Immanuel Kant, considered by many to be the greatest philosopher of modernity, was a German philosopher who was central to the thought of the Age of Enlightenment. Immanuel Kant was reacting against the moral relativism of his time. David Hume held the view, who was a contemporary of Kant, held the view that moral actions are those that are agreeable and useful to ourselves and others. It is entirely subjective ethics. It entirely subjectivizes ethics. It makes it a matter of opinion or taste. Kant's project in the wake of the death of traditional religious morality was to restore the transcendent moral order through reason. He shows, in the words of Michael Sugre, that God's justice, the ultimate divine moral law, is not a myth created by humans, like Hume, who supposed that morality was another branch of anthropology, a useful sociological construct, but with no cosmic meaning or purpose. Kant said in response to this view, he said, "I cannot stand to see morals brought to the level of wretched anthropology. We need a moral system which unites all of our moral perceptions. Our experience of the world is that the moral aspects of our conscious experience are more fundamental than the material and objective aspects of our experience." And so Kant, and anyone who does good for its own sake, that we're acting as though there is this transcendent moral order, which is self-evident to us in our conscience, which Bishop Barron says is the stand in the vicar for God and Christ in the soul. Yet this could not be rationally formulated yet in Kant's time. Enter Kant. So Kant also believes in God for the reason, even though he believes he has shattered all ontological, teleological, cosmological arguments for his existence in his famous Critique of Pure Reason. I disagree, but that's not strictly relevant to the video, for the simple reason that in order to unite our experience of reality, there must be a personal lawgiver. Seeing that the just world hypothesis is absurd on its face, on this plane of existence at the very least, there must be ultimate divine justice, an afterlife of reward and punishment to clear the teleological ledger, as Chris Langan says, so that our actions can be judged by an objective standard of good and evil. In his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, which, by the way, is one of the 3 philosophy books Chris Langan recommends on his website, along with the Critique of Pure Reason, also by Kant, and the History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. In his Critique of Pure, he has this idea of the categorical imperative. And so, but to understand this, we have to go into his metaphysics. Briefly, in his Critique of Pure Reason, he divides the world in 2 halves. This is problematic for a reason we'll get to in another video, but it will suffice for the present time. Noumena, the inherent data structures of space and time, and the phenomenal realm, which is between our ears. It's our brain, it's our conscious experience, which imposes experience on the outer objective realm. Newton earlier had shown that there are basic laws which apply to everything we perceive. Force is always equal to mass times acceleration. Falling bodies always accelerate at negative 9.8 meters per second squared. Every action, at least on Earth, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and so on and so forth. Kant says similarly that there must be these same kind of laws which apply to all moral agents, all free and sentient entities who commit free moral acts existing within noumenal reality, to have an objective standard of righteousness and morality. He rejects the mechanistic determinism of his era, which has now been disproven by the advanced metaphysics of the CTMU, and asserts the supremacy of freedom and morality, if only in this noumenal world. Thusly, he formulated his famous categorical imperative, a moral law which applies to everyone, everywhere, at all of the time. Every rational agent is bound by the subjective standard, that one must act such that the maxim by which one acts could be generalized to the entire world, could be generalized to all of society. Everyone should act according to that maxim. So we can generate a series of moral rules based on this, which ought to be obeyed by everyone. This is why Chris Langan says morality can't just be consequential, how much aggregate pleasure is caused by my actions, like the utilitarians think. but instead it must be ideally consequential as well as deontological. It is supposed to conform to a set of absolute rules that are good in themselves, for example, the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, the Kantian categorical imperative, which rely on logos insofar as absolute ethical rules are justified only in terms of absolute truth and reality, but it is no less true that the expected consequences of good actions conforming to good rules are supposed to be beneficial rather than harmful, leading to positive rather than negative outcomes for all concerned. So the CTMU position is essentially utilitarianism through Kantism, through virtue, through contractual ethics. They all converge at the same, at the same point, at the very top. So Langen gives these three examples: the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, and the Kantian categorical imperative, as rules which obey God or the logos. The logos is transcendent moral order in the cosmos's teleology, the ultimate meaning and purpose of human existence. So let's unpack these. So, as I said in my video on the Ten Commandments, the Ten Commandments are directly spoken emanations from God's super-tautological structure. I am that I am. I am being itself. I am the self-subsisting one. I am ipse esse subsistens, the sheer act of being itself. My utility is self-defining. I evolve by a certain parameter which is conducive to wise moral action, and thus there are a set of rules which everyone ought to follow. Among these, don't murder, honor your parents, don't steal, don't commit adultery, and so on. These are all things which have to be the foundation of any moral, rational society, especially a new one like the Israelites in the desert. More than any specific rules or formulas, God is revealing his moral essence to the Israelites. In fact, Kant believes that God himself is bound by the categorical imperative. For Kant, God is a perfect Kantian. His interpretation of the Abraham story, which I completely disagree with, but I could make a video about that, but anyways, is that whatever told Abraham to sacrifice his son, it can't have been God, because this was not a very Kantian thing to do. Surely, everyone can't be told to kill their sons, even if we all die, even though he's ultimately stopped at the end. It's not a maxim which can be generalized. And so God cannot deviate from this morality, which carries with it maybe a metaphysical hubris of Kant is one interpretation, that Kant thinks God must be a Kantian, but also the soteriological hope of the kingdom of ends, which we'll get to at the end of this video, and an innate conviction of Leibniz that we live in the best of all possible worlds, even if we can't discern that on this plane of existence. Secondly, the Golden Rule, treat others how you would like to be treated, is another such law which reveals the foundation of moral symmetry, the reciprocal altruism which is the meaning and purpose of human existence, and arguably as I learned from Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, the reason why human beings triumphed. And thirdly, the categorical imperative itself, which is a rule which is good to follow regardless of its consequences, but only because it tends to produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Kant said the only good thing is a good will. The categorical imperative is not so much a rule as a rule generator. It's training you to act in a moral manner, to use reason and inspiration as the basis for every single action, and in so doing, providing an objective standard by which our actions can be judged, essentially by the degree to which we retain God's essence in the world. We are, again, being trained to be moral creatures, a kind of spiritual speciation where we regeneratively ascend to a higher form of existence through this moral philosophy. It is good. We are becoming less like the animals and more like the angels with a higher rational will. It is good in itself, capital G good. And the consequence of not abiding by this rule is plain to see. Michael Sugre gives the example of a mafia hitman who goes to murder someone for money. Surely he doesn't want to live in a society where everyone murders each other. He thinks it should be a universal moral law that no one should murder one another, with one exception: me. This is offensive to the moral order and absurd on his face, that we think that the moral order should make exceptions for ourselves and for our own actions. And he says further that this is true not only of the mafia hitman, but of all the acts and maxims we act by when we know we're doing something wrong. Again, the conscience is the stand-in. It's the vicar for God. It's not our animalistic instincts coping with not being able to maul other human beings like Nietzsche thought, but rather a transcendent moral order revealed to us, and it reveals to us how we ought to exist in the world, and calls us out on it when we fall short of the glory of that, what maxims we should live by. That is virtue. We're living up to the moral rules which we deep down know apply to everyone. everywhere, all of the time. And this connects to Kant's idea of the kingdom of ends. And I'll just read here some parts of the Wikipedia article. It says, the kingdom of ends is the hypothetical state of existence that is derived from Kant's categorical imperative. Kant uses it to mean the systemic union of different rational beings under common laws. These common laws, established by the categorical imperative, are the gauge used to evaluate the worthiness of an individual's actions. People can only belong to the kingdom of ends when they become subject to these universal laws. Such rational beings must regard themselves simultaneously as sovereign when making laws and as subject when obeying them. Morality, therefore, is acting out of reverence for all universal laws which make the kingdom of ends possible. In a true kingdom of ends, acting virtuously will be rewarded with happiness and meaning and fulfillment and purpose. In his writings on religion, Kant interprets the kingdom of God as a religious symbol for the moral reality of the kingdom of ends. As such, is the ultimate goal of both religious and political organization of human society. My interpretation of this is that the only way to actualize the kingdom of ends is to act as though it exists, and it does exist. It is embedded in the manifold of possibility with which we're constantly confronted, and we can make the free choice to actualize it through moral living. We must become free and rational. We must become rational and free moral agents to live out the proposition that moral living is a transcendent good, even if we can't immediately see the utilitarian effects of our actions. We need to train ourselves to become moral agents. Kantian moral philosophy is ultimately an outbranch of the Judeo-Christian monotheist worldview. Morality is not disparate or relative, but singular and absolute. It's the affirmation of a transcendent moral order, and which applies to everyone, and that following in the teleology in the moral order of this moral order is not only how we bring meaning and purpose to our own individual lives, but also how we bring about the kingdom of heaven on earth. Like Isaiah said, then shall your light burst through like the dawn, and your healing spring up quickly. Your vindicator, your Messiah, shall march before you. The presence of the Lord shall be your rear guard. So let the light shine forth in the darkness. May the peace of our Father in heaven be upon you. Like and subscribe. Peace.